Welcome back to News Talk. Coming up in the second half hour this time, a look at what's at stake tonight as Iowa voters caucus. National Review reporter Elena Platt here with a preview of tonight's dramatic first votes. Right now, though, let's get back to our conversation with Dr. Michael Atkins. He's an oncologist at MedStar Georgetown University Hospital and a cancer researcher at the schools at the Georgetown University Medical Center. Let's open up the phone lines if you have a question or comment for Dr. Atkins. Obviously, we can't get into a lot of specific back and forth in terms of, but general questions, absolutely, at the number on your screen, 703-387-1020. As I said at the outset of our conversation, and it's sad but true, that there are very few families that have not been impacted by cancer in some way. So if you have a question or comment for Dr. Atkins, dial now, those of you watching in the 11 a.m. hour, which is when we can take calls, 703-387-1020 being our number here. I suspect most of the people listening to our conversation now, Dr. Atkins, were really amazed that someone like Jimmy Carter at age 93 could have cancer and get treated and have such a great outcome, A, to have that happen at all, and B, to have it all happen in such a compressed period of time. Do you know anything about the contours of his case, and can you talk to us about it? Because it seems totally remarkable.
So I can talk to you about what's known in the public domain. Mm-hmm. And so Jimmy Carter had melanoma. I didn't have a history of having a melanoma on the skin the way most melanoma presents. His was what we call an unknown primary and presented with an abnormality, a metastasis in his liver, which was diagnosed as being melanoma when he underwent surgery to remove the abnormality in his liver, and the pathologist looked at it under the microscope and saw that it was a melanoma, and then they did what we call staging to look to see where else it had spread, and it, according to the news reports, had spread to areas of his brain, right, and small lesions in his brain that could be targeted with very specialized type of radiation, which we call stereotactic radiation, or can be called a cyber knife, which only radiates where the tumor is, doesn't radiate the normal brain. You come at the lesions in the brain from, let's say, 1,000 different angles, and all those beams crisscross only at the tumor. And that allows for much higher doses of radiation to the tumor while sparing the rest of the tissue. Can be very effective in brain metastases. And then after that, he was put on one of these immunotherapy drugs that block anti-PD-1. And at least after 12 weeks of treatment, no new disease had shown up, which I think is impressive. But the type of thing that we see actually is becoming the rule rather than the exception in our patients with melanoma, that we see benefits from these type of therapies. What's, I think, remarkable are two things. One, President Carter didn't know about this, and his first statements were that he was going to put things in God's hands, but then he saw his doctors at Emory and heard about new treatments, and he said that this was a treatment that he could take. And even in his 90s, the treatment is tolerable enough that people felt comfortable giving this to a former president of the United States.
How wide, you mentioned Emory, and of course you're at Georgetown, how widely available are these treatment modalities becoming, and are doctors aware of them enough to be able to refer their patients to the people who can provide the best, make maximum advantage of the advances that we're seeing?
Sure. The drugs, the anti-PD-1 drugs, are approved agents in melanoma, kidney cancer, lung cancer. And so the community oncologists, all oncologists, are aware of these drugs, and I'm sure that every oncologist in America is using some of these drugs for their patients with lung cancer. What I think they may not be fully aware of is how these drugs work and what to expect from them, and how these are just the tip of the iceberg, and how much additional progress we need to make, and we actually can make through the research studies that we're doing. And in particular, that these drugs, which are working in those 3 cancers that I mentioned, work in 20 different cancers that they probably haven't even realized could be possible to be treated, but can only get their patients can only get access to those drugs through current research studies.
In terms of the approval process, or the uses for which they're sort of allowed under current rules?
Drugs get approved once there are studies done that show they are better than the standard of care, and those studies are underway in many cancers, but they have not completed yet and not reported out. And the studies also suggest that there's ways of improving upon those results by giving combinations, and there are a lot of unanswered questions that we are really poised to answer in melanoma and kidney cancer and lung cancer and other cancers that we still need to do research in order to do. And President Obama's announcement will coordinate the cancer effort through, hopefully, Vice President Biden's leadership, so that we can actually do those studies more efficiently, identify ways to get those drugs approved and in community oncologists' hands and patients' bodies more quickly, and that we learn when to give particular treatments to particular patients. At
the beginning of your remarks, you said there were 3 major advances. Did you want to say more about the third of the 3? I didn't want to short circuit, given that all of this is so exciting and so promising.
So everybody knows about how we can now use computer technology to manage mountains of data that we never were able to potentially use to our advantage. And the same thing has happened in oncology. So we can, through the Cancer Genome Atlas, not only do we have a list of mutations that profile particular cancers, but we also can look in the tumor microenvironment where the immune cells are and find what cells are there and what their functions are and whether they recognize the tumor or not. And we can get all that data out of analyzing the tumor. We also have many patients who are being treated with new therapies around the country and around the world in community practices on standard of therapy, and we have the ability to collect that type of data through electronic health records and try to use that information to try to figure out how these drugs are performing in practice and where we can potentially move things forward using some of the patient population material that really has not been available to research in the past.
To what extent have these advances transformed the obviously difficult conversation that folks like you have probably had innumerable times when someone gets the diagnosis and it's the dreaded C word, and you know, depending on your age and general outlook, you might think, oh, it's over, it's the end, it's cancer. Have these, I mean, and I know you don't want to hold out false hope and you don't want to make promises. There's still uncertainty in all of this. But have these advances transformed the conversation and the approach when cancer strikes?
Absolutely. In my clinic, when patients come in and we used to talk about things that we hoped would work, now we see things that are more likely to work than not, and actually produce cures, which I define as stopping the treatment and having the cancer never come back. And so giving patients the hope of that actually happening, and not just false hope, but realistic hope, I think changes the conversation. And every week in clinic, there are people who've gotten these treatments who have had their disease go away and stay away. So even the complexion of the clinic is completely different. It's become less a morose oncology clinic and more a discussion about where people are, where they are in their lives and what they're doing in their lives and what great events in their families' lives they're now going to see that they might not have been possible to see in the past.
Tremendously exciting. And if this notion of a moonshot takes off, then presumably the sky is the limit. But obviously we're in a great place now compared to where we were. So this is all pretty cool stuff. Dr. Michael Atkins of MedStar Georgetown, great having you here. Thank you so much for your time. Hope we get the chance to talk with you again.
Thank you very much, Bruce. It's my pleasure.
An update on the hour's top stories is next. And then Cruz or Trump, Sanders or Clinton. A live preview of tonight's Iowa caucuses.